In the year 536 AD, the world woke up and the sun was wrong. It still rose over the horizon, but its light was weak, pale, almost sick. At noon, there were no sharp shadows. Days felt like permanent twilight. For months, people stared at the sky and wondered the same thing. Had God turned his face away from the world? This was not a legend. It was the beginning of what many historians now call the worst year to be alive. One man wrote down what he saw. Procopius, a historian living in the Byzantine Empire, described the sun like this. The sun gave forth its light without brightness, like the moon, during this whole year. Imagine hearing that from a man who had seen wars, plagues, and sieges. And yet this dim, dying sun was what truly unsettled him. And it wasn't just Procopius. In Italy, in the Middle East, in China, in Ireland, monks and chroniclers wrote about a strange, dry fog in the sky, a haze that would not lift, a cold that did not belong to summer. Snow fell in China in the middle of the growing season. In Ireland, records mention a failure of bread that lasted for years. Something had reached up and placed a hand over the sun. More than 1,000 years later, scientists drilled deep into the ice of Greenland and Antarctica. Layer by layer, year by year, the ice kept a frozen diary of Earth's past. And there, locked in a layer dated precisely to 536, they found it. A violent spike in sulfur and volcanic ash. A volcano, most likely in the North Atlantic near Iceland, had exploded with such force that it punched ash and sulfur high into the stratosphere. Those tiny particles spread around the globe, forming a thin veil around the planet, reflecting sunlight back into space. The result was a volcanic winter. Crops did not understand this new sky. Seeds that had sprouted with hope simply stopped growing. Harvests failed. Seasons blurred. The world was still turning, but under a faded, dying light. But the sky was only the beginning, because when the light changed, everything that depended on it began to fail. Imagine waking up in a small village in Europe in the year 536. You step outside your wooden house, expecting the warmth of late spring. Instead, a cold wind cuts through your clothes. The sun is a pale disk behind a gray veil. Your breath hangs in the air, even though it should be warm. Weeks pass. The fields stay stunted and weak. Grain heads are small and fragile. Fruit never fully ripens. At first, people blame themselves. Maybe the fields were not plowed correctly. Maybe the rituals were not done the right way. Maybe God is angry. But then the same stories begin to spread from faraway lands. Messengers and traders bring rumors of failed harvests in distant provinces of the Byzantine Empire, of strange weather in the Middle East, of cold summers in China, of mysterious fogs over the sea. This is not a local curse. It is something larger, something global, in a world that does not yet understand the word global at all. By the year 537, the situation has grown worse. 2 summers in a row have been struck by this ghostly light. grain reserves run out. People start grinding anything they can find into flour, acorns, roots, even tree bark. Famine does not arrive like a sudden storm. It creeps in slowly, tightening its grip day by day. Children become thin and silent. Old people stop walking to the fields. Families sell whatever they own for a few sacks of grain, until there is nothing left to sell except themselves. Across Europe and the Mediterranean, the cost of food explodes. Those with power hoard what they can. Those without power do whatever they must to survive. Some abandon their homes and take to the roads, wandering from village to village, city to city, searching for a place where the sky has not gone wrong. They rarely find it. In the Byzantine Empire, in the Kingdom of the Franks, in distant settlements in Britain, the same pattern repeats: failed crops, hunger, disease. In Central Asia and China, records speak of summer frost, of yellow dust and dim light, of people freezing when they should have been planting. And this is only what survived on paper. Countless stories of those years were never written down. They simply ended. Modern scientists think the eruption of 536 was followed by at least one more massive volcanic event, around 540. Like a boxer that has already been knocked to the ground, humanity was hit again before it could stand up. And then came the final blow. In the year 541, in the bustling ports of North Africa and the Eastern Mediterranean, ships began to arrive, carrying a cargo no one could see. Inside the holds, grain rustled in the dark. Among the sacks, rats moved silently. On their bodies, fleas fed and jumped from host to host. Inside those fleas, a tiny, invisible killer was replicating. The bacterium we now call Yersinia pestis. One by one, people in the great city of Constantinople began to fall ill. It started with a fever, chills, and a sense of deep, unnatural exhaustion. Then came the swellings, painful, black buboes in the armpits and groin. Within days, many were dead. The plague of Justinian had arrived. For an empire already weakened by failed harvests and strange skies, this new terror was almost unbearable. Some estimates suggest that in certain cities, up to half of the population may have died. Imagine streets filled with carts carrying the dead, church bells ringing constantly, graves dug as fast as human hands could work, and still never fast enough. To the people living through it, it must have felt like the judgment of heaven. First, a sun that refused to shine. Then, years of cold and hunger. And finally, a plague that stole away the survivors. Today, historians and scientists look back at this period and see more than just a series of disasters. They see a turning point. The combination of volcanic winter, famine, and plague in the mid-6th century shook entire societies. Trade networks faltered, cities shrank, armies could no longer be fed. Some regions entered economic and cultural decline that would last for generations. In parts of Europe, this era sits at the threshold of what later writers would call the Dark Ages. Of course, history is never as simple as one eruption causing 1,000 years of darkness. But when you start to connect the evidence, the dim sun of 536, the cold decade that followed, the failed harvests, the desperate migrations, and the plague of Justinian, you begin to see how fragile human civilization can be when the balance of nature suddenly shifts. And here is the most unsettling part. The people of 536 had no idea what had truly happened. They did not know about volcanic ash in the stratosphere or sulfur aerosols reflecting sunlight into space or climate feedback loops. They only knew that the world they depended on, the regular rhythm of seasons, the promise of light and warmth, the simple trust that the sun would rise the same way tomorrow had been broken. We, on the other hand, know far more. We can trace ash layers in ice cores. We can model climate changes on supercomputers. We can monitor volcanoes from space. Yet for all our knowledge, we are still living on the same thin, fragile crust of Earth, under the same vulnerable sky. The year 536 reminds us that history is not just about kings and battles. Sometimes, the main character is the planet itself. A single eruption in a remote place can change harvests, rewrite economies, and leave scars in human memory that last more than 1,000 years. If you had stood under that pale, sick sun in 536 AD, you might have thought the world was ending. It didn't. But for millions of people, the world as they knew it was gone. And the echoes of that darkness are still with us, frozen in ice, written in chronicles, and whispered by a dim, distant sun in the coldest decade of the last 2 millennia. If this glimpse into the worst year to be alive unsettled you, there are more forgotten disasters, lost civilizations, and buried stories waiting in the shadows. Stay in the dark with us. Subscribe, and don't let these echoes of the unknown be buried again.